The world reeling from US President Donald Trump's tariff blitz, a baseline levy of 10% on all imports triggering retaliatory action by China and the European Union, as the American leader vows payback for years of what he calls unfair trade practices. Mr. Trump's new tariff regime puts America first in the spotlight. Higher reciprocal rates will apply to countries will apply to countries with which the US has significant deficits. The so-called discount rate covers roughly half the rate of duties that Mr. Trump calculates is charged by other nations. First on the chopping block is China, which now faces a reciprocal rate of 34% on top of the existing 20% tariff. A rude awakening for allies such as the European Union and Japan, as well as partner India. Not on the list, at least this time, are Canada and Mexico, as two of the US's largest trading partners, but they have already been hit in earlier rounds. The worsening trade war follows another new 25% levy on all foreign-made vehicles. Mr. Trump is insisting it is foreign countries that will pay the cost of these tariffs. But critics say the move could drive up prices for Americans instead. And for more, we have Olivia Siong live from Beijing, Cullen from Brussels, and Neha Poonia in New Delhi. Olivia, let's start with you. China's considerations, would it have seen this move coming?
That's right, Wei Su. China would have seen this coming, and it has been preparing for tougher policy moves from the Trump administration. But where it's different is that these reciprocal tariffs are coming in higher than expected and faster than expected. And so some analysts that I've been speaking to say this could affect China's calculus, and it could be more open to negotiating in the future. So what are its considerations? First, we have to look at the impact. According to some estimates, the Chinese surplus over the U.S. trade accounts for about 2% of its GDP, and ING Bank forecasts a drag of between 0.4 and 0.8 percentage points on GDP growth this year. And as such, when asked about the possibility of future talks, we know that China has called on the U.S. to remove these retaliatory reciprocal tariffs immediately, also calling it bullying. But the Commerce Ministry said that the two countries' economic teams have been in communication, but that China is willing to exchange views with the U.S., but this should be based on equal dialogue and consultation. The key word here being equal, as China has said that these are unilateral tariffs. The other consideration, too, in its negotiations would be to make sure that it doesn't look weak to its domestic audience. And this is something that has been echoed by China's foreign ministry. Have a listen.
中方多次强调，贸易战、关税战没有赢家，保护主义没有出路。中方敦促美方纠正错误做法，以平等、尊重、互惠的方式，同包括中国在内的世界各国磋商解决贸易分歧。
Olivia, as you mentioned, if these tariffs coming harder and faster than China had anticipated, how is that going to be changing its next moves against these tariffs?
Well, what we can be certain of is that China's next move is going to be carefully calibrated. So what could be on the table? We could possibly see those counter tariffs coming in again the last round when those 20% additional tariffs were introduced. We saw China hit back with tariffs on U.S. imports, including agricultural products as well as natural gas and coal products. Analysts say China could perhaps raise these existing tariffs, but it will also be very mindful not to inflict any pain on its own economy as a result of this retaliation. Another possibility are other levers that China has turned to, putting American companies on unreliable entity lists, that antitrust probe on Google, also export controls on critical minerals. But then again, observers saying that China being mindful that it's trying to woo foreign investment into the country. So all this will have to be taken into consideration. But the message from Chinese leaders is that China has ample policy space to maneuver with these uncertainties in its external environment. So possibly we could see China devaluing its currency to buffer against these additional tariffs. Possibly also some sweeteners perhaps talk about that deal over TikTok in the US. But regardless of what happens, we will likely see China also double down on its push to boost domestic consumption here in China so as to move away from its reliance on exports, as we have seen in the past.
Thanks, Olivia. Ross Cullen in Brussels. We heard, Olivia, that China is prepared for this. The European Union has, since Mr. Trump's first administration, his first time in office, has already lined up what it called at that point and continues to refer to as a bazooka instrument against tariffs from a US administration. They are European leaders meeting for talks. What can we expect out of these latest talks?
Well, the reaction, certainly, we can be left in no doubt as the position of Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission. She was very firm in her reaction statement after the announcement from President Trump of the sweeping tariffs. She said, quote, "This was a major blow to the world economy. I deeply regret this choice. The global economy will massively suffer. Uncertainty will spiral and trigger the rise of further protectionism." She said the consequences will be dire for millions of people around the world. We've also heard from the French Prime Minister. He's been speaking ahead of a crisis meeting in Paris. President Macron has been convening the heads of the top sectors that are likely to be impacted by President Trump's manoeuvre. The French Prime Minister saying that the decision by the Trump administration to impose these new import taxes was a catastrophe for the world economy. So very strong statements coming out of Europe today. We also saw European stock markets open earlier today in the red. And so there's been a bit of a rout in terms of the financial indices. But looking forward to how they might react, we do know that trade ministers are going to be holding talks on Monday. Their trade representatives are already discussing a possible response. Ursula von der Leyen says we might not necessarily want to retaliate, but we do have a strong plan to retaliate if necessary with countermeasures. They've already put in place to support the steel sector after those original tariffs on steel. And we do know that there is also a strategic dialogue being opened by European Union leaders for the steel sector, the automotive sector and the pharmaceutical sector to try to ensure that they can react with possible countermeasures to retaliate against this move from the Trump administration.
Thanks for that, Ross. India hit even harder than the EU has been, slapped with the highest tariff rates imposed on any major US trade partner. Neha, given that New Delhi has made concessions ahead of these swinging tariffs, any sense of shock or surprise from New Delhi?
Well, we've not heard from President Trump's friend, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, but there has been a reaction from the Commerce Ministry, which came in much later than we saw reactions coming in from other world leaders. And the statement simply says the government is analyzing the impact of these measures. It's in talk with key stakeholders, and it's also looking at whether or not these measures will present an opportunity for Indian businesses when it comes to doing trade with America. So, the government, they're trying to give this a positive spin, trying to downplay the impact that this could have on Indian businesses. But this is along expected lines. We saw India and US teams hold extensive trade talks here in New Delhi last week, where reportedly India asked for an exemption from the US team, and that was not granted. And this is something that India had been preparing for, and now you have the government saying on record that it doesn't think the impact is going to be very extensive. We've also heard from various trade bodies who are talking about what this potentially means, and they're talking about how India can make inroads in those sectors where its competitive, Asian economies will potentially lose ground as well. And we've also heard, though, from critics who are accusing the government of downplaying this, saying that it's not taking into account the extensive impact this could have on Indian exports, which could fall by as much as $30 billion.
Thanks, Neha Poonia. A more positive spin coming out of New Delhi compared to the rather strident responses from the European Union and as well as China. So Ross Cullen in Brussels there, and Olivia Siong for us in Beijing.